So we're hoping to, over the next hour, cover off a lot of information, and we have time for some quick questions along the way, probably. But we do respect your time today and what we'll hope to move along. And I'll turn things over to Julie and Lori with their slides.
And I just want to encourage everybody to go ahead and ask questions as we go. Things will come up, and it's nice to talk about them while we have the image on the screen. So unmute yourself, because I can't see the chat when I'm showing my screen. So just go ahead and ask your question as we go along. I'm good with going with the flow. So we are going to start where you start, which is pulling in and parking. And there's a number of photos related to parking. This is the parking that is right past just that first building there, where the ice cream is for sale there. And there are only 2 accessible parking spots in this part of the main beach parking. And one of the things that I would like to see is more accessible parking added with signs and with curb cuts throughout the whole beachfront area along the whole strip. And one of the funny things about this particular parking space is when a car pulls up right here, the car kind of has to pull up close enough that it actually blocks the curb cut. So anybody who's using a mobility device isn't actually able to access that curb cut because the car kind of becomes in the way. So the way to solve that is to move the curb cut over to be between the 2 parking spaces, make the spaces a little bit wider, and have the access aisle painted out on the road there, as well as having some vertical signage on posts to indicate that those are indeed accessible parking locations. You're going to see me in almost every single one of these photos because Carol was very insistent that she be the photographer. So sorry about that. Oh, there's a much better example of seeing how that curb cut is super friendly for somebody who's using a wheelchair, mobility device, walker, scooter. But you can only get to that when the car is actually not there. This is my favorite spot to park. I don't tell anybody, but I take up 2 parking spaces because they're not wide spots. This is in the lot across from that area. And I park so that I know that no one will park beside me and get in the way of me being able to get my wheelchair out of the car and back into the car. So that's why I park, like I straddle the line there. So this is another awesome space to make an accessible parking spot. Just take up those 2 spaces, sign them, and then people have more options. It's about having options. Vans also take up a lot more space, especially if they have a side access ramp, because it's not just the ramp that takes space, but you also need space for the person and the wheelchair so that they can be accessing the ramp at the bottom of the ramp. So it's actually quite a lot of space that's needed for there. And these are really simple things to switch out the next time the lines get painted. So I would love to see this happen in the spring, the next time the lines get painted in the parking lots. This is my other favorite spot to park, and I do the same thing. I kind of straddle the line right here, and then I have this free clear space that I know no one's going to be able to block me in there. Corners are great for that, so it's easy to make access possible there. Another parking thing, this is really new, is the electric vehicle parking that's happened down at that same parking lot. It's great that we have the EV charging there, but I want to point out the fact that it's not at all accessible with the curb being there, and it's a safe distance away so that the cars aren't going to run into it. I get that, but adding a curb cut there and some flat surface, some cement, so that somebody'd be able to get out and plug their car in, because yes, wheelchair users do drive electric vehicles as well. So that's just something to think about for the future and for future installations of electric vehicle charging. There are no current guidelines or regulations for EV charging and accessibility, but it doesn't take too much to sort of think outside the box to figure out how to make these kinds of new features accessible for everybody. So moving on to talk about before we move on to parking, is there any questions, or before we move away from parking, are there any questions about parking, signage, any of that? We're good? Okay, so we're going to move on to talking about path of travel. This is the sidewalk that's coming down from the hill through those 2 parking lots and then across the other lane of traffic towards that first pavilion. Something that would be great to have added here would be some color contrast and tactile indicators, so that somebody who's navigating with a white cane would be able to detect that they are coming into a path of travel. So this is a safety feature that could be applied in a number of different places along these sidewalks, in this space here and in this space here. Every time you come into that path of travel where vehicles are going to be driving, you need to provide some indication that that is what's going to be occurring. One of the things that I struggle with being shorter because I'm using a wheelchair is making myself seen when I'm trying to travel across this space right here. I love this big, circle space. It's friendly and welcoming, but it's also kind of dangerous because there's no signs to indicate that this is a crosswalk. There's no paint on the road to indicate that it's a crosswalk, and traffic aren't necessarily looking at people, especially people who are shorter in stature, or potentially, kids that are moving fast. So I would love to see some signage added to posts as you're approaching this crosswalk area, and having some bright colored paint to indicate to traffic that people could be crossing in this area. Again, pretty easy fix because it's paint. And this is the same area just from the other perspective. What a beautiful picture, Carol. My goodness, such a photographer. I love it. So there are definitely posts here where those signs could be added that says pedestrian crossing. That's kind of all it would take. And then we come up to the pavilion and we have some seating that's available here. There are 3 or 4 of these round designed picnic tables and then one standard sort of rectangular picnic table. I wanted to take this picture because I wanted to point out that the only accessible table, so these tables are designed with 4 seats, and then this table is designed with 3 seats, and there's 1 seat that's missing so that a person who's using a wheelchair can pull themselves right in and underneath. And it's fabulous because it makes you feel like you're not an add-on and you have to like sort of scooch in sideways on the end of a picnic table. But it's turned in a way so that it's actually, you have to almost roll off the cement. So, I mean, it's just a matter of moving the table, but it's something for recreation staff to remember, that an accessible space actually needs to be accessible so that somebody can get to it. And when it comes to procurement and making decisions about purchasing things like picnic tables, it's great to always remember that each space where picnic tables are set up should have at least 1 accessible option. The water fountain is at an accessible height. It's got good knee clearance as well, cane detectable, so no issues with that there. We were dealing with some sunlight. And looking at the washrooms in the first pavilion, I wanted to, we're going to talk about all of them. Did we go in the men's here? I can't remember. But anyways, the door protection here is great because when those doors swing open, we don't want anybody walking into those doors as they swing open. And that's why these are here. These, I forget what they're called. Gates, bollards, they're not bollards, but anyways, we could add some color contrast to them. They do kind of blend into the environment. So that's something to think about in the future. We have 3 washrooms here. We have the men's washroom, we have a restroom, and then we have a women's washroom. And I know that that's what those are because that's what these signs say. So then we have some confusing information, I think, because we have power door openers on all 3 doors and they all have the accessible symbol on them. So it leads one to believe that possibly each of these washrooms is accessible, but that is in fact not the case. So we're going to look at what's going on inside the washrooms. first we're going to go into the women's washroom. So power door opener opens that washroom, no problem. But once you get inside, you very quickly discover that none of the washroom stalls are actually accessible. So I understand the addition of the power door opener because it benefits so many people other than just wheelchair users. I totally get that. But we may want to consider the design of the interior of the washroom space, possibly taking out 2 stalls and making one that's actually accessible, because at that, well, we'll get to this, but at this site, there's actually only 1 toilet that is accessible, and that's in that middle washroom. So I have a very tiny wheelchair, so I can squeeze through that door, but I can't shut it and I can't get to the toilet. The change room also is not accessible. I can get into the space, but it's the door swing prevents the door swinging in prevents me from actually closing that door and using that space. The sinks are accessible. I can roll under them. The pipes are protected. I can reach the soap. I think I could reach the soap. Yep. But one thing that I couldn't reach was the needle disposal. This is a very, very common thing that happens in almost all washrooms, is that a sharps disposal container is always placed at a height that is out of reach for anybody who is short of stature or using a mobility device, a seated mobility device. And I could maybe put something on the top, but I've added an extra little picture over here on the right to show you that you really have to get that used needle into that hole, and I wouldn't be able to do that. So it's not a safe thing for sure. Easy to change that out as well. So that was the women's washroom. Now we're going to venture into the I forget what's on the sign. I think it just says restroom, and it has a photo of a man, or an image of a man and a woman. There's actually no accessible symbol on this washroom at all. So it's got a power door opener. It has a toilet setup that is more or less accessible. There's always some things that can be done differently in accessible washrooms. I have, in all of my experience with accessible washrooms, and I've wrote the book on it, I have yet to find the perfect accessible washroom. There's always something that can be done differently to improve it. In this situation, this grab bar is a little bit on the low side, and the emergency call system is in a place that's not ideal, because usually emergencies happen on the bathroom floor, and being on the bathroom floor might not allow somebody to actually reach that button without having to sort of wedge themselves between the toilet and the wall. And the sanitary disposal is in a better location when it's on the side wall, because it prevents somebody from really having to turn, and balance is often an issue. So those are just some of the things, but it's got a front open seat, and it's got a seat lid, so you don't have to lean against the plumbing, which is lovely. In the rest of the washroom, it's got a really deep sink, which means you have to have long arms to reach the soap. Oh, and there's that needle disposal that's also, again, really high. So reaching the soap while being at the sink is actually impossible unless you have go-go gadget arms, which I do not have. And you also can't reach the paper towel dispenser when you're at the sink. So it means putting your wet hands on your mobility device to then go over to the paper towel. Looking at the mirror, you might realize that it's a little on the high side. There's no reason why that mirror can't be dropped 6 inches so that I'd be able to see more than my forehead. Even though it's tilted, there's still not a lot of visibility. And there's the photo of, like, that's how much of myself I can see in that mirror when I am seated. So that is that washroom. Oh, except for the door openers. This is such a funny thing, because they're wonderful. They're super helpful. This is a wickedly heavy door. In fact, a couple of years ago, I did a video of how heavy this door was, and it was almost impossible for me to open it by myself. So now we have these awesome door openers, but the way the electrical has been set up, it's, even with all of this signage, you still have to stop and go, which one do I have to push to open and close the door? it's funny, you look at this and you think, well, it's pretty logical, push to open, push to lock, but you still have to pause and think. And it should be so intuitive that you don't have to pause and think about which button to push. And that's the washroom. So we didn't get to the men's room, but I imagine it's quite similar to the women's. Any questions before we leave the washrooms? Any things you want to talk about there? They will come up further down the boardwalk. Lori and Carol, anything to add about washrooms before we leave those topics?
I think you covered it pretty well, Julie.
Okay. All right, so the new sidewalk out the back side of the pavilion is brilliant. I love it. It's wide. It's got a really lovely slope, so it's not super steep, and it provides you with options of places to go. You know, going towards the pier, or going down and around the other side to the playground. A safety note though, and maybe this is just because it was just finished and nothing's kind of been like figured out yet for this particular area, but this is quite a drop off. It's about 6 inches, which is potentially dangerous for somebody to fall off the edge. So marking it, either filling that in, which I don't really think is possible, but certainly marking it with some color contrast, so that people see that this is a drop off, is something that would be really beneficial to all sorts of people all the way along there. I love the new seating that's provided here and the way the seating has been organized, because it means that I can pull up adjacent to a bench on a flat level surface. So I'm not having to roll onto grass or into a garden to sit beside. I don't have to sit in front, and it allows that feeling of being included to be the way it is, which is lovely. So this is an example of that where that doesn't happen. I can't pull up beside the bench. I have to sort of be awkwardly in front without getting myself stuck in the sand. And we missed getting photos of the Moby mats out in place, but this is where one of the Moby mats joins onto the sidewalk. It's fabulous. There is also a sign that goes on this post there that talks about the Moby mat and, I don't know, points it out, which is lovely. There's that tactile warning indicator surface that I was mentioning before that we could have added into the sidewalks around the parking area and around the trafficked areas. A note about staff when they install the Moby mat, that it needs to be directly adjacent to the end of that sidewalk. There can be no gap, because little wheels, like my little front wheels, for example, very, very easily get caught up in that, and it can become like a launch yourself out of your wheelchair kind of situation, which nobody wants to be involved in, especially me. A note about maintenance in the beach area. We're obviously there towards the end of the season, and there's been a significant amount of wind after the days leading up to our visit. And so sand has encroached on the sidewalk. So just making sure that sidewalks are maintained with snow, not snow shoveling, with sand shoveling, as well as snow shoveling when it's appropriate. Looking at the new play structures that are here, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for people with disabilities to be involved in the play structure, and I love it. I rolled right up, and I think I got this far. I rolled all the way up here, and there's like, you know, steering wheels and interactive different things that can be done along there. So as a parent with a child who's on the play structure, I can play with the child on a good portion of that play structure. And as a child using a mobility device, they would also be able to be involved in the play that is happening there. So the play structure is great. Something that needs to be considered with the rest of the play structures is access to those play structures. So with this playground is adjacent directly to the sidewalk. So you can roll along the sidewalk and roll right up onto the play structure. But when we get to seeing the swing set, we have these two different types of swings that allow kids with disabilities to be a part of the swinging activity. And that's such a freeing thing to be able to get out of a wheelchair or a stroller and, you know, be somewhere different and fly through the air. So I can't get there, is my point. I mean, not that I am the body size for those swings, but a child with a mobility device needs to be able to have access to those spaces without having to be carried by a parent. Some kids are big and it's difficult. So the closer you can get them to the swing set, the better. Oh, this was another spot that I'd love to see some accessible parking. And when you look at the amount of space that's here, it's just ripe for just adding some paint and a sign. And it's another brilliant spot because you've got direct access right up on to the boardwalk there. And that's just up from that first section of parking. So I'll talk about the boardwalk in a minute. Love the boardwalk. So this is the second pavilion, and we had some fun here, Carol and I, because I've never been in this pavilion before, and I always roll by it and I curse at this sign every time because we no longer use the word handicap, and it's been like a bee in my bonnet, and I keep wanting to like call somebody and say, hey, when are we going to change out this sign? So the sign says, notice, washrooms, handicap washrooms available at Pavilion 3, St. Christopher's Beach, and Pavilion 4 at Rotary Cove. So by reading this sign, you would get it implies that there is no accessible washroom in this pavilion. So I was like, Carol, let's just go and see what's in this pavilion, what these washrooms are like. And it's not accessible. There's I'm rolling out onto the street, onto the road, and then rolling across the gravel and the lawn to get to the pavilion. And then we get there, and lo and behold, this is what's inside the pavilion. I was like, oh my God, this is the best bathroom at the beach. And we have a sign out front that says basically that there is no accessible washroom here. So this was quite a treat to find and use, and it's great. Like I said, there's always something that can be done differently, but it has the pivotal fold down grab bar, which is when you need one grab bar, you usually need two grab bars. So to have a grab bar on both sides of the toilet is a real winning situation for a person who uses a grab bar, because it gives you options of use, and it gives you opportunity to pull your pants up on both sides of your body, not just on one. So this was a great find. One thing that we will point out is a few little things that can be done differently, like this foot activated sanitary disposal doesn't serve all people, and this hook in the accessible stall does not serve very many people that are using a mobility device. So again, easy things to switch out. Whichever company provides these things should not be providing foot activated ones. Like that's just common sense, and pretty easy to move or add a second hook on that door there.
Julie,
Carol,
I just want to add that perhaps a little bit of color contrast in the actual washroom. I noticed that on the other slide as well, that on our committee, we have a person who uses a white cane, and he talks about getting lost in bathrooms. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of color contrast just to give some perception of where the wall is and where it ends, and where the toilet actually is.
Thank you for sharing that. The door actually, like the door and the stall frames have really great color contrast with that dark red, but you're right, the floor and the wall, they blend in straight to one another. So painting out that, like even this bottom half row of bricks as sort of like a baseboard would be a great way of helping people navigate. Thanks, Lori, for adding that in. And adding a D-pole on the front of that door helps that door open. And the hand washing is not a bad setup. The soap's a little bit of a reach, so having it on the side wall beside the sink makes it more accessible. In the men's washroom in the same pavilion, we have a lower urinal and grab bars on either side of the urinal, which is something that is great. And I don't find it very often, to tell you the truth. Again, adding some color contrast there so that there's great contrast between the urinal and the wall itself also helps people with vision loss. And here we are back outside, just to reinforce the fact that there is no accessible path to this washroom, yet we have this great accessible washroom inside. So super opportunity here to create a path that goes from the edge of the sidewalk here over to the boardwalk or around the outside of the building. So that was where I was sitting right there. We could bring it around the outside of the building to be past the water fountain and to gain access to the picnic shelter as well. Not much to say about that picnic shelter aside from adding a path and maybe a few tables that have more accessible seating. So here we are at the boardwalk itself. I've already said how much I love it. Every time, so I live in Blythe, but every time in the summer, fall and winter, no, summer, spring and fall, I go to Goderich, I make sure that I plan into my day time to roll on the boardwalk. It's an opportunity to roll in a space that is safe and level and beautiful all at the same time. So kudos to the team that did this, because it is a real game changer. Not just because it's level and wide and safe, because there's no traffic, but also because it is flush level to the ground and there's no danger of rolling off of it like there used to be, or falling off of it and twisting your ankle. That was always something that was a concern for a lot of people. So it's really amazing now. In future designs, I'd love to see the garbage and recycling receptacles a little bit closer to the boardwalk, because then it means that I can get to them a little bit more easily, more likely to put my garbage where it belongs. Not that I'm going to drop it on the ground, but you never know. I want to come back to the sign in a second. No, you know what? We'll just go right to talking about the sign. So where do I want to start? Okay. See, I can't even see. There it is. Can't even see what I want to see, which is the whole point of what I want to talk about with this sign. So we have, if you look down here, bottom right, you see the accessible mat on the beach. You see the little tiny wheelchair symbol. And then you have to, where is that? I don't even think I can zoom in. Okay, so I think I've made my point. I didn't even mean to make my point like this, but I'm making my point that it's hard to find the places on the map that are the accessible locations. And we, as the international symbol of accessibility is that little wheelchair symbol, but it's always blue. And so people who benefit from finding features that are accessible in nature are looking for that little blue wheelchair symbol. And because we didn't make it blue on this map, it makes it harder to find. Some of the icons are also on the small side, and it would have been better to increase the size of all of those icons on this map, so that everybody would be able to find those features a little bit more easily. So that's just a little bit of feedback on the sign. Carol, was there anything else that we had talked about when we were looking at the sign?
Not that I recall, but as I'm looking at it, there is that little accessible wheelchair, but it is black. So yes. I think if this was a larger, if we had zoomed this up, we could have seen it. But again, like you said, it doesn't jump out at us.
Yes, exactly. And I want to see where the accessible parking is. I want to see where the beach mat access is and where those accessible washrooms are. And they should all be indicated with that blue wheelchair symbol. Here's another opportunity for just improving the parking here by adding, possibly merging these two spaces to make it a van accessible spot, having the transfer aisle marked out with paint and the hash marks so that people are not parking in that transfer aisle space. It does have a sign. And then if you come to the other end of that same sort of parking area, this is just before the water treatment plant. We have another accessible spot, but there is no vertical sign. So in all of the signs that are here on this post, none of them indicate that spot is accessible there. And it's got the tactile indicator, which is great at getting up onto with direct sidewalk access onto the boardwalk. And this is a little bit of just a funny thing. People with disabilities not often, but do have service dogs, and service dogs need to be cleaned up after just as well as other dogs. So having that just a little bit lower down on that post would make it a little bit more accessible for everybody. Moving to, I guess this is Pavilion 3. And the playground here has no accessibility features at all, no access, and sand, which is also pretty hard to navigate with a stroller, let alone a mobility device with a heavier person in it. So maybe that's a future possibility for an upgrade when it comes to looking at playground structures. And then moving on to Pavilion 3 and washrooms and access to the pavilion. I see this as a huge missed opportunity when this cement was being poured. Whatever that is, 12 more feet of cement could have carried direct access from the boardwalk right over to the pavilion without having to go over the mud and lawn to get to the bathrooms that are here, because there are accessible bathrooms here as well, which I also didn't know about until we went in. I have my places that I go because I know they work for me, and then I tend to not look at other spaces. We'll look at those in a minute. Arrangement of picnic tables is obviously something that is a challenge because people will just come along and move them. They're not attached to the floor. These ones are stinking heavy, so I'm surprised that people were moving them, but Carol was able to move that one so that I could get around the corner and onto that picnic space. So just having space around picnic tables is something to think about. So there I am rolling across the grass. I don't even think that's 12 feet of cement. Wouldn't have been too much expense there. So here we have the women's washroom. We have a power door opener there. So it's like, is it accessible? Is it not accessible? Oh, let's go and see. And lo and behold, there is a stall that is semi-accessible. Again, I have a pretty small wheelchair, so I can get into some tighter spaces, but somebody with a scooter or a larger wheelchair would not be able to get in and around the door to get into this stall. So there is a D-pull on the door, which makes it easier to open the door. But it's just a little on the awkward side with that whole door arrangement. I wonder if changing the direction that the hinges are on would make a difference. And then making some upgrades in the bathroom itself. So setting up the grab bars to be the proper L bar with the toilet roll below, a fold down bar on the transfer side, and having a non-foot activated sanitary disposal beside the toilet within reach of being seated on the toilet. People don't want to have to figure out what to do with their waste, whether it's sanitary disposal or catheters or whatever. You need to be able to put it into the garbage without having to get up off the toilet.
This is also a good example of the
color contrast.
The color contrast, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Lori. That is exactly what I was talking about in that other bathroom. So it's nice to see it in action. It's a bit of a tight space washing your hands in this washroom, and I'm not really sure what the fix is in terms of moving the garbage can so that the push button is easily within reach. But you know, just a little bit of problem solving to figure that out. Again, there's that sharps container higher than head height. But but I was able to wash my hands there. And then you come along the outside of the pavilion, and you have to roll around the door, past the corner, to see that that power door opener is there. And I know it was there so that you weren't in the swing opening of the door. So I don't really know what the answer is to that, but I just know that it's a bit awkward rolling around the corner there. An opportunity to potentially make this sort of accessible would be to add some color contrast around the urinal and add some vertical bars on either side of the toilet. Not the toilet, the urinal. And that's it for washrooms, I think. And then here we are again in an opportunity to sit right alongside the bench. This is like the best spot to sit and just watch the waves and watch the people go by. And I thank you for joining us on our virtual tour, which should have been an in-person tour. Carol, this would have been a fabulous day for everybody to have been together outside. And I hope we have provided you with some new ideas, some things you maybe hadn't thought about before. And I open the floor to questions or things you would like to argue about or whatever.
Who would like to go first with questions, or was there anything that surprised you, or you have a further question about something we saw today? Deputy Mayor Pasnet.
Just a couple comments. I want to thank Julie for the slideshow. Obviously, you have a better perspective of all these issues, and going through those slides and seeing it from that perspective is definitely eye-opening for me on certain things with the washrooms, especially. I think moving forward, the nice thing about our waterfront now is we do have parking meters that generate some revenue that we can use in regards to enhancing or developing new washrooms. And you've brought a lot of good information that Sean and myself can sit down and take a look at and give some serious consideration. It's very eye-opening to see all this, and I appreciate you taking the time to show us.